Campaign 2016 segment tonight. There's no question the Democratic Party has gone far left. Moderate Democrats are few in Congress and are afraid. It's a far cry from the leadership of John and Robert Kennedy, who were generally hardliners when it came to foreign policy. This coming Friday would be Robert Kennedy's 90th birthday. You'll remember he was assassinated in 1968 while running for president. A Palestinian named Saran shot him dead in Los Angeles, that assassin still in prison. Now, RFK was a tough guy, and as Attorney General confronted the mafia and civil rights offenders. I admire much of what he did. So the question for us is, what would the Kennedys think of today's Democratic Party? We put that question to RFK's daughter, Kerry Kennedy, the president of the RFK Center for Justice and Human Rights. I spoke with her yesterday. The ISIS threat itself. The Viet Cong were no direct threat to the United States when your father was running for president. It was a containment of communism. ISIS is a direct threat to the United States. And when Russia threatened the United States, your uncle and your father were very tough on Khrushchev. How do you think your father would have handled ISIS?
You're right. They were very, very tough on Khrushchev, but they had a very healthy sense of skepticism with regard to the Pentagon and with regard to those who were calling for war. And as you remember, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Pentagon was saying we should bomb, we should bomb, we should bomb. Well, if we had done that at the time, we would have wiped out the entire city of Miami. Nobody was tougher on Khrushchev, but they were very skeptical about going to war because they had both been in the Navy. They had both seen war. You know, it's hard to say what Daddy would do now, 50 years later, but I think if you looked at his life, he again and again tried to avoid war and tried to save people's lives and tried to bring peace. Right. And that's what his life is about.
We now face a very, very serious threat, and we saw what al-Qaeda did on 9/11. Let's go to the refugees.
I think that he would absolutely say we should allow the refugees, who are mostly women and children, to come into the United States.
I agree that your father, and I know him through studying, and I wrote, of course, Killing Kennedy, so I know your family pretty well, would have accepted the refugees, not single men.
I think that if you look at who are the refugees we're talking about, especially Syrian refugees, they're in UN-controlled refugee camps in our ally states like Turkey and Jordan, etc. They are vetted by the United Nations first. Then they go through the whole UN process under the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees. Then next step, they go through the U.S. process, and they're vetted again by the Terrorism Task Force. So these are very, very vetted people.
I think your father would take them in, and I would take them in.
Well, I think that's great.
No single men. All right, now I had a beef with you and your foundation over a group in Morocco that your Justice Foundation had designated as a human rights violator. You remember the group, correct?
I do, absolutely.
All right. That group paid Bill Clinton and Chelsea Clinton $1 million to go to Morocco to give a speech. I said your group should stand up and say, no, human rights violators should not be included in the Clinton Foundation's donation deal. And you disagree, correct?
Well, I'll tell you something, Bill. You are so great because my father is one of your heroes. You come to our dinner almost every year, our gala, and you are so generous to us. We get donations from all over the world, and we definitely do not go to each and every one and vet them.
I don't know, but I vetted you. Well, and you don't take money from human rights violators. But the Clinton Foundation does.
Well,
it's as simple as that. I asked you to stand up and say that's not a good thing. You didn't do it. So I boycotted you this year. I still think
we need you.
I think your Justice Center is worthy.
Thank you.
But if I'm going to contribute heavy money to a Justice Center, I want it to be a Justice Center. And when a human rights violator goes in and gives Bill Clinton $1 million, Congress, you can say, you know what, maybe you want to rethink that. That's just my opinion. I'll give you the last word.
I appreciate that. And I think what's really important is what's going on in Western Sahara. And I'm glad that Fox News is talking about that. It's a land that's been occupied by Morocco for 30 years. It has massive human rights violations.
Sure, the people are dirt poor. And that $1 million that mining company gave to Bill Clinton, you think how much good that could have done to those poor people in the Western Sahara?
Absolutely,
that you're interested in?
And I wish they would spend it right there.
We appreciate you coming in and taking the fire, and I admire your father, and he's going to be 90 years old on Friday, and we're very happy to have you here.
Thank you. And come back to the gala.